Hello, and welcome back to Velvet Haunt. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that linger in the velvet dark, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. I have spent most of my life feeling like a ghost trapped inside my own body. You know what happens when you repeat a word too many times? After a while, it stops sounding real. It loses its meaning and becomes nothing more than a strange noise made by your mouth. That was how everything felt to me. My job. The traffic outside my apartment. People laughing in cafes. The sound of phones ringing. The smell of rain on the sidewalk. Even my own reflection in the mirror. It all felt distant, like background noise coming from another room. I'd always been strange in that way. Even as a child, I needed certain habits to make myself feel safe. I could not sleep unless there was a heavy, cast-iron skillet beside my bed. Every night I poured thick lines of salt across the doorway and along the windowsills. Whenever someone asked why, I said it was for bugs. That explanation did not make much sense. We lived on the 4th floor of a concrete apartment building. There were hardly any insects. Still, I kept doing it. I could not remember when the habit had started. I only remembered my mother teaching me. She told me to keep salt at every entrance. She told me iron had to remain close to where I slept. She made me promise that I would never forget. Then, somehow, I did forget. The habits remained, but the reason disappeared. Every day, I woke before sunrise and drove through city traffic to an office where I sat inside a gray cubicle from 6 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. I typed numbers and words into a computer, but by the time I reached home, I could barely remember what I had done. It felt like spending 11 hours inside a prison. My daughter, Mirage, had to wait for me after school. Classes ended at 3, but I could not leave work until 5. Sometimes she sat alone for almost 2 hours before I arrived. I hated that. I tried to speak to my boss once, but before I could even ask him to shorten my hours, he reminded me that the company was making cuts. He said people who wanted special treatment often found themselves receiving smaller paychecks. I could not risk it. Some evenings, Mirage's teacher called me. She would accuse me of being careless. "You cannot keep leaving your daughter here like this," she would say. "You are her mother. You need to take responsibility." Sometimes the connection broke before I could answer. The line would fill with static, then go silent. I always felt ashamed afterward. Believe me, I wanted things to change. I wanted to be a better mother. I wanted to feel present in my own life. That was why I started seeing a therapist. His name was Dr. Aris. He had a quiet office with soft lighting, dark wooden shelves, and a leather chair that made a small squeaking sound whenever he leaned back. During our last session, I told him that I felt as if the city was swallowing me. He listened, tapping one finger against his notebook. "What you are describing sounds like dissociation," he said. "It is a coping mechanism. You are drowning in noise, responsibility, and routine." I stared at the carpet. "What am I supposed to do?" "You need a hard reset," he said. "Get out of the city for a few days. Go somewhere quiet. My family usually spends holidays in the countryside. There is no reason you cannot take a short break now." "A holiday?" "Not necessarily. Think of it as disconnecting." I forced a smile and nodded. Disconnecting sounded impossible, but also wonderful. When the session ended, I left the building and crossed the parking lot. Mirage was waiting in the back seat of my car. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that always seemed to fall across her eyes. She was holding a pink crayon drawing against the window. I got into the driver's seat. "How was school, sweetie?" She lifted the pictures. "Good. We learned about butterflies, but I drew fairies." The paper showed several tiny people with bright pink wings. They were flying above giant flowers covered in glitter. "The pretty fairies with sparkly wings live inside flowers," Mirage explained. I smiled at her through the rearview mirror. "Only the pink ones?" "Yes. They're nice, and they love everyone." Her feet kicked happily against the back of my seat. Mirage reminded me of myself at that age. I had also loved fairies. I believed they lived in flower buds and slept beneath mushrooms. I imagined tiny women with shining wings and soft voices. Then my mother told me what fairies really were. She had grown up hearing old stories about the fae. According to her, they were not pink or gentle. They did not grant wishes. They did not protect children. They stole them. They changed their faces. They used glamour to make terrible things look beautiful. I could not confirm any of it, of course. It was only what my mother had told me. But the stories had frightened me enough that I stopped believing in fairies. Strangely, I also became more interested in them. I read about glamour magic, changelings, iron, salt, and the old rules people once followed to protect themselves. Most of those memories had faded as I grew older. "Mommy?" Mirage's voice pulled me back to the car. "Yes?" "The children at school tease me." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Why?" She looked down at the drawing. "Because you make me carry the salt pouch and the little iron bell." A cold feeling moved through me. I had packed those things into her school bag for as long as I could remember. I did not know why. "I'm sorry it makes you uncomfortable," I said. "It's just..." I stopped. How could I explain something I did not understand myself? "Never mind. I'm sorry, honey." Mirage looked up and smiled. "It's okay, Mommy." She spent the drive home talking about fairy dust, magical castles, and tiny queens who lived inside flowers. Eventually, she fell asleep with her cheek against the window. When we reached our apartment, I carried her upstairs. I unlocked the door and stepped carefully across the line of salt I had poured across the threshold that morning. Our apartment was ordinary. It was too far from my office, but close to Mirage's school. That was the only reason I remained there. I carried her into her bedroom and placed her beneath the blankets. Her walls were covered in drawings. Fairies, pink wings, golden castles, sparkling forests. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed with a cast iron skillet on the floor beside me and scrolled through social media. A post in a local travel group caught my attention. A farmer in the countryside needed someone to stay in his cabin for a few days and watch the property while he was away. The advertisement was simple. Quiet, isolated, perfect for a getaway. Dr. Aris's words returned to me. "Disconnect." I messaged the farmer. He replied within 10 minutes. The dates worked for him and the cabin was available. I looked toward Mirage's room. She would love the fields. She could run through the grass, draw flowers, and search for her sparkly pink fairies. I accepted. Packing took 2 full days. That was far too long for a short trip, but my habits would not allow me to leave easily. I packed 3 cast iron skillets inside a heavy plastic crate. My shoulders hurt when I lifted it, but I could not bring myself to leave any of them behind. Then I poured 2 full boxes of coarse salt into plastic bags, sealed them twice, and pushed them into the bottom of my duffel. Mirage watched me from the living room floor. Crayons were spread around her, and she was drawing a huge castle with pink glitter glue. "Why are we bringing the heavy pans?" she asked. "The cabin probably has kitchen things." "Old habits," I said. She waited for more. "Food tastes better when it is cooked in iron." It was a poor lie, but she accepted it. The drive out of the city was exhausting. For 2 hours, we moved through traffic. Horns screamed from every direction. Tall apartment buildings rose around us, their gray shapes disappearing into dirty air. I watched the clock on the dashboard move through the hours I would normally spend inside my cubicle. For once, I did not feel guilty for missing work. Eventually, the concrete buildings gave way to highway. The highway became a narrow country road. Then the road turned to dirt. The city noise slowly vanished. At first, the silence felt pleasant. Then it became too complete. The sun began to sink behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the fields. The radio signal broke apart until only static remained. I switched it off. The quiet inside the car became heavy. It was not the peaceful silence Dr. Aris had described. It felt thick. The farther we drove into the valley, the more it seemed as if the air itself were pressing against the windows. Mirage had her forehead against the glass. "The trees are so tall," she whispered. They stood close together on both sides of the road. Dark pine branches formed walls that seemed to continue forever. "Do you think they live in the deep parts?" she asked. "Who?" "The fairies. Maybe they have a kingdom where people can't find them." "Maybe." I kept my eyes on the road. Looking into the forest made me anxious. The trees were too straight, too still. Not one branch moved, even though I could feel cold air blowing from the car vents. 10 minutes later, the road opened into a wide clearing. A wooden cabin stood in the center of an overgrown field. Its paint had peeled away, revealing gray wood damaged by years of rain. Several hundred yards behind it stood an old barn. The barn was taller than the cabin and much older. Its double doors were locked with a thick iron chain and a rusted padlock. An old pickup truck waited near the porch. A tall man leaned against the hood. He wore a dirty canvas jacket and had a rough gray beard. He watched us drive into the clearing without waving. I parked. As soon as I turned off the engine, the countryside silence swallowed us. "We're here," I told Mirage. She did not move. She was staring at the chain on the barn. The man walked toward me as I stepped out of the car. "You the woman from the internet?" he asked. His voice was rough and low. "Yes, I'm Clara." I offered my hand. He looked at it for a second before taking it. His grip was painfully strong. "Thomas," he said. I glanced toward the car. Mirage was pressed against the window, smiling and holding up her box of pink crayons. "I wanted to ask about the sleeping arrangements," I said. "The advertisement mentioned one bedroom. Is the bed large enough for both of us?" Thomas frowned. He did not look toward the car. He looked only at me. "The bed is big," he said after a long pause. "King-sized?" "Good. Thank you." He pulled a ring of brass keys from his pocket and tossed them to me. "The cabin's open. Well, water's safe. The gas stove works. Lanterns are inside in case the power goes out." He turned toward the truck, then stopped. "One rule." He pointed at the barn. "Stay away from there." I looked at the black, rotting wood around its base. "Is it unsafe?" "Animals won't go near it," Thomas said. "There's been a sweet rot coming from it for about a week. Had to move the sheep and cattle to the North Ridge because they were panicking." He opened the truck door. "I'll be back in a few days." He climbed inside without waiting for an answer. The truck roared to life and threw gravel behind it as he drove away. Within a minute, the red lights disappeared between the trees. We were alone. I opened the car door. Mirage climbed out, her shoes sinking into the wet grass. She did not look at the cabin. She stared at the barn. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes?" The man was wrong. I was lifting the crate of skillets from the trunk. "What do you mean?" "The smell." Mirage breathed in deeply. A happy smile appeared on her face. "It doesn't smell rotten. It smells like cotton candy, like a bakery." The crate almost slipped from my hands. I turned toward the barn. The air smelled thick and sweet, but not in a pleasant way. To me, it smelled like meat left in the sun. "Inside," I said. "Now." The cabin was exactly what I thought I needed. It was small and built from thick, dark logs. The air smelled of cedar and pine. There was no television and no internet router. A wood stove stood near the wall. The kitchen had a deep porcelain sink. A large oak bed filled most of the sleeping area, covered by a thick patchwork quilt. For the first time in years, the faint ringing that always lived inside my ears disappeared. I stood in the center of the room and closed my eyes. The smell from the barn did not enter the cabin. Inside, everything felt clean, safe, disconnected. Mirage ran toward a carved rocking chair near the window. "Look, Mommy." She climbed into it and began rocking. Creak, creak, creak. I unpacked. First, I poured a thick line of salt across the front door. Then I covered the base of the only window. It was unnecessary, I told myself. There were no city insects out there. Still, the routine made me feel calmer. Next, I placed my favorite skillet on the nightstand beside the bed. Mirage watched me from the rocking chair. "Are we making pancakes tomorrow?" "If you go to sleep on time." She smiled. By 8, darkness had swallowed the field. Without streetlights, the world outside the windows looked completely black. I lit 2 kerosene lanterns. Their golden glow made the cabin feel like a small fortress. For dinner, I cooked grilled cheese sandwiches. Mirage ate happily, melted cheese covering her fingers. "Fairies like sugar," she told me. "We should leave a spoonful on the porch." "We'll see." Now, after dinner, I placed her in the large bed. She looked tiny beneath the quilt. "Good night, my sweet girl." "Good night, Mommy." She fell asleep almost immediately. I climbed in beside her. I did not check my phone. I did not open social media. I listened. No horns, no sirens, no angry neighbors, no footsteps from the apartment above us. Only silence. For the first time in years, I felt as if I were truly inside my body. I was not haunting myself anymore. I fell asleep smiling. I woke around 2 in the morning. There had been no noise and no nightmare. I simply opened my eyes. Moonlight entered through the window. I turned toward Mirage. She was sleeping sideways across the bed. Her feet were pressed against the cast-iron skillet on the nightstand. I frowned. I thought I had placed it farther away. Then I noticed the kitchen. Every cabinet door was open. All 4 of them stood at the same angle, like dark mouths. I stared. I had closed them after dinner. I remembered the magnetic latches clicking. The house must be uneven, I thought. Old buildings shift. The doors had probably opened on their own. It was a reasonable explanation. I pulled the blanket over myself and went back to sleep. The next morning was beautiful. Sunlight painted bright lines across the floor. Dew covered the field outside. The cabinet doors were still open. I crossed the room and pushed them closed one by one. Each latch clicked firmly. Nothing strange. Nothing to fear. "Mommy!" Look! Mirage rushed through the front door. I had not even noticed that she had gone outside. She wore a yellow dress, and her shoes were wet from the grass. In both hands, she carried a thick piece of old paper. Where did you find that? I asked. You didn't go near the barn, did you? No. It was on the porch beside the big post. I think the fairies left it because we forgot the sugar. She handed it to me. The paper felt like old parchment. Its lower half had been torn away. Silver gray writing covered the page. It's a poem, Mirage said. Read it, I read aloud. A flutter of glamour, a trick of the eye, the cupboards stand open, the milk has gone dry. A silver-toned jingle where shadows reside, and a stolen young soul by the next morning's tide. For they loathe the false parasites feeding on lies, who paint them with wings and a gentle disguise. Mirage clapped. They wrote about wings. I forced myself to smile. The cupboards stand open. The words bothered me. So did the part about stealing a young soul. I folded the paper and put it in my bag. It was probably something written by a farmer's child years ago. That was what I told myself. I made pancakes. The rest of the day was peaceful. We stayed far from the barn. I sat in the grass and read while Mirage chased butterflies among the wildflowers. She spoke to bushes and flowers, pretending fairies lived inside them. I felt happy, truly happy. That night, I cooked dinner and put Mirage to bed. I fell asleep quickly. Then I dreamed. I stood in the clearing, but the cabin was gone. Only the barn remained. Its iron chain lay broken in the dirt. The doors were open. A sound came from inside. Jingle, jingle, jingle. It sounded like silver coins rubbing together, but it was loud enough to shake my teeth. Two shining eyes opened inside the darkness. They were high above the ground. A thin shape moved forward. It was tall and twisted, with long arms and narrow fingers. In one hand, it held Mirage by her hair. I tried to scream. No sound came. I woke gasping. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I looked beside me. Mirage was there, sleeping peacefully. I pressed my hands over my eyes. Only a nightmare. When I lowered them, I saw the kitchen. Every cabinet was open again. Every drawer had been pulled out. Then I heard it. Jingle. A single metallic sound came from beneath the rocking chair. My heart began to race. I reached toward Mirage. My hand touched cold sheets. I turned. The bed was empty. Mirage? My voice shook. Sweetie? No answer. I jumped out of bed. The cabinet doors stood open around me, but I no longer cared. The front door was slightly open. A thin line of darkness entered through the gap. She had gone outside. I ran across the room. My bare feet broke through the salt line as I threw the door open. Cold air struck my face. The smell from the barn had spread across the field. Rotting meat, thick and wet. I looked toward the barn. The chain lay on the ground. One door was open. A piece of bright yellow fabric showed in the darkness. Mirage's dress. Mirage! I ran. Wet grass cut my feet. My lungs burned, but I did not slow down. I reached the barn and rushed inside. Get away from... The word stopped. Moonlight entered through a hole in the roof. Mirage sat cross-legged in the center of the light. She was smiling. A pink crayon drawing lay in her lap. Mommy, she shouted. I saw one. A real fairy. The smell inside the barn was unbearable. It coated my throat and made me want to vomit. Mirage's fingers crushed the edges of her drawing. She was not looking at it. She stared into a dark corner. Get up, I said. But look, she pointed. She doesn't have wings. She said wings are a pretty lie people tell because they don't want to see the teeth. I looked. At first, there was only old hay and rusted farming equipment. Then the shadows moved. They stretched upward, forming something tall and thin. Jingle. The sound came from the corner. I grabbed Mirage's arm and I pulled her up. We ran. She did not cry. She laughed against my shoulder as I carried her across the field. The sound made my skin crawl. I slammed the cabin door and locked it. I placed Mirage in bed. Do not move. She nodded and closed her eyes. Within seconds, she was asleep. I needed to calm myself. Dr. Aris's voice entered my mind. Dissociation, a coping mechanism, an episode. I went to my duffel and took out the poem. Under the lantern light, I read it again. A flutter of glamour, a trick of the eye, glamour. The word struck me. My mother's stories. The cupboards stand open. They were open. A silver-toned jingle. I had heard it. A stolen young soul by the next morning's tide. This was not a poem. It was a warning. The final part had been torn away. The other half had to be inside the barn. I looked at Mirage. I could not allow anything to take her. She was the only thing connecting me to the world. I took the cast iron skillet from beside the bed. Then I opened the door and stepped over the salt. The walk back to the barn felt endless. The smell grew stronger. I held the skillet tightly. It was the only thing keeping me from turning around. Inside the barn, the moonlight still touched the place where Mirage had been sitting. A torn piece of parchment lay in the dirt. I ran toward it and grabbed it. The top edge matched the first half, and before I could read it, something moved in the corner. Jingle. Jingle. The sound was heavier now, like chains being dragged. The darkness lifted from the wall. A tall body unfolded. Long joints snapped into place. Two glowing eyes opened. It stepped toward me. I ran. Behind me, the jingling became fast and wild. I crossed the field, climbed the porch, and threw myself through the door. I locked it and fell against the wood. Something moved through the grass outside. Then it stopped at the porch. Silence returned. I lit the lantern. My hand shook as I opened the second piece of paper. I read, "To ward off the true ones, old iron must stay, and a salt-bitten threshold will keep them away. Turn your coat inside out. Block the sight of the moon, for the changeling returns to its master by noon. Lock the wild out of sight. Keep the solitary space, lest the true one remembers its own stolen face. Iron, the skillet, salt, the doorway. I had both. Then I saw the line about the coat. My gray coat hung near the door. I stood and pulled it down. I turned the sleeves through and exposed the inside lining. Then I placed it back on the hook. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then a high ringing exploded inside my head. I cried out and covered my ears. The cabin walls seemed to twist. The lantern light stretched and bent. The floor moved like wet paint. Then everything stopped. The jingling outside disappeared. I looked toward the bed. The quilt was flat. Mirage? I crossed the room. My legs shook. I pulled back the blanket. There was no child, no yellow dress, no dark hair. In the middle of the pillow was a pile of wet black soil mixed with rotten twigs, pine needles, and dead grass. I fell beside the bed. I could not breathe. Then my memories began changing. No, they were not changing. They were clearing. I thought about the school. Mirage supposedly waited for me for hours, but I never saw another parent when I collected her. I thought about her teacher's calls. The voice always disappeared into static before I could answer. I had never met the teacher. I had never met any of Mirage's classmates. No one at work ever asked about my daughter. No one had ever seen her. I remembered carrying her from the car, but I could not remember feeling her weight. I remembered cooking for her. yet there were never dirty plates left behind. I remembered buying her clothes, but I could not remember entering the shops. The memories had always been there. They only began to make sense when Mirage disappeared. I looked at my hands. I thought of my lifelong need for salt and iron. I had not been using those things to keep something outside. I had been using them to keep myself inside. The final line of the poem returned to me. Lest the true one remembers its own stolen face. The thing in the barn had not come for a human child. Mirage was not human. Mirage was glamour. She was a beautiful shape created from dirt, sticks, and dead plants. She had been made to pull me away from the city. She was bait. The things in the forest did not want her. They wanted me. I had escaped them long ago. I had spent years hiding inside a false human life, surrounded by iron, salt, noise, and concrete. Then I forgot what I was. The brass deadbolt turned by itself. I stared at it. The door opened slowly. Cold wind entered the cabin. The smell of rot followed. No creature stepped inside. It did not need to. It had already taken away the only thing that made me believe I belonged among humans. I do not remember leaving the cabin. Thomas found me the following afternoon. I was sitting on the floor beside the bed. He called the police. He told them I had arrived alone. He never saw a child in my car. They believed I was a grieving woman who had suffered some kind of breakdown. I am back in my apartment now. My company fired me because I stopped going to work. I do not care. The world feels less real every day. Traffic passes below my window, but it sounds far away. People speak to me, and their words disappear before I understand them. Sometimes I look at my hands and wonder whether they are truly hands. The fog in my mind is gone now. I remember my mother. I remember sitting in the back seat of a car many years ago. She was crying. She told me about the true ones. She made me carry salt. She placed iron near my bed. She told me never to follow music into the woods, never to trust beautiful wings, never to answer a voice that called from inside a tree. She was not trying to frighten me. She was protecting me. My mother knew what I was. Maybe she stole me from him. Maybe she found me. Maybe she loved me enough to build a human life around me and teach me how to remain inside it. For years, her protection worked. Then I forgot. I grew tired of the gray city and my empty office. I wanted to escape. I wanted silence. I wanted something real. The things in the woods heard that desire. They gave me a daughter. They gave me Mirage. She became my anchor. She gave me a reason to wake, work, drive, cook, and remain among people. She was not real, but my love for her was. I brought the soil back from the cabin. It is spread across my living room floor. Black dirt, dead grass, pine needles, rotten wood. Sometimes I sit beside it and imagine I can see the shape of a little hand. I have not slept in 4 days. The cupboards opened again last night. The kitchen drawers followed. Then I heard a faint sound beneath the floor. Jingle. I poured salt across every doorway. I covered the windowsills. I placed the cast iron skillet beside my bed. The habits returned immediately. My mother's voice returned with them. Keep the iron close. Do not break the salt. Do not look outside when you hear the bells. But I looked. 2 green eyes watched me from the alley behind the building. They were much higher than a human's eyes should be. I closed the curtains. The jingling continued until sunrise. I am writing this because someone else may feel the way I did. Maybe you feel detached from the world. Maybe the city sounds like meaningless noise. Maybe you have habits you do not understand. Maybe you keep iron close without knowing why. Maybe you wake to find cabinets open. Maybe you hear silver bells in rooms that should be empty. Listen to me. Do not search for magic. Do not follow anything beautiful into the forest. If a child tells you that they have seen a fairy, leave immediately. It may already be too late. I have placed salt across the doors and windows. The skillet is beside my bed. The apartment is silent. Still, I can smell cotton candy. The sound is coming from Miraj's room. I have not opened that door since returning. There should be nothing inside except drawings. Fairies with pink wings. Castles covered in glitter. Flowers large enough for tiny people to sleep inside. A little voice just called me. Mommy? I'm standing in the hallway. My hand is resting on the doorknob. The salt line beneath the door is broken. God. I know what she was. I know she was never real. I know opening that door is exactly what they want. But I want to hear her laugh again. I want to carry her to bed. I want to listen to her talk about butterflies and fairy dust. I want my daughter back. Mirage, my beautiful Mirage. My Mirage. Story 2. The Whitcomb estate delivered the painting to Nora Kessler, wrapped in several thick blankets, almost as if the men carrying it were transporting a body. They arrived shortly before closing time on a Monday evening. Neither of them wanted to stay long. They placed the covered frame against the wall of Nora's restoration studio, handed her a folder of documents, and asked her to sign at the bottom of the delivery form. The family needs it returned by Friday, the older man said. Nora looked at the size of the wrapped canvas. Friday morning or Friday evening? Friday morning. She almost laughed. A proper examination alone could take several days. Cleaning and repairing a portrait of that size might take weeks, depending on its condition. But the Whitcomb family had agreed to pay the auction house's rush fee. And the auction house had promised Nora an additional amount for working late. Her rent was due on the 9th. She signed the form. The delivery men left so quickly that one of them nearly forgot his gloves on the table. When Nora called after him, he returned, took them without thanking her, and hurried back into the hall. The elevator doors closed behind them. Nora was left alone with the wrapped painting. She stood in the middle of the studio, listening to the old building settle around her. The studio occupied the upper floor of a converted warehouse. At night, every sound carried. Pipes clicked behind the walls. Floorboards shifted. Wind moved against the tall windows. None of those noises usually bothered her. She had spent hundreds of nights working alone. Nora had restored paintings for almost 14 years. She had repaired cracked landscapes, water-damaged family portraits, smoke-blackened religious panels, and several large works that had spent decades forgotten inside damp basements. She knew how old paint behaved. She knew the difference between dirt, soot, mold, and darkened varnish. Paintings did not frighten her. Bad clients frightened her. Deadlines frightened her. Rent frightened her. The blankets did not. At 10 that evening, she finally began unwrapping the canvas. The outer blanket was gray and smelled faintly of dust. Beneath it was another made from heavy wool. A third layer had been tied around the frame with thin rope. It seemed unnecessary. A painting needed protection during transport, but the Whitcomb estate was only 40 minutes away. The frame was not especially delicate. The canvas was large, though not unusually so. As she removed the last blanket, Nora understood why the delivery men had handled it so carefully. The painting showed a gentleman dressed in black Victorian formal clothing. He sat in a carved wooden chair with one leg slightly forward and both hands resting on his knee. His face was pale and swollen. The skin had been painted with heavy white and gray tones, giving him the appearance of a man recovering from a long illness. His cheeks were round, but the rest of his body looked thin beneath his black coat. His eyes stared toward the left side of the canvas, fixed on something outside the frame. The portrait was not beautiful. It was not technically impressive either. The unknown artist had understood shape and color, but had failed to give the gentleman much life. His posture was stiff. His expression was empty. The black clothing blended into the dark background. The only unusual feature was a thick black streak near the man's mouth. At first, Nora thought it might be smoke damage. The estate records said the portrait had hung in Whitcomb Hall since the late 1800s and had survived at least one fire. Several rooms had burned badly in 1934. She moved the canvas beneath the studio lights and took photographs. The dark streak was difficult to capture. Whenever she changed the angle of the lamps, the mark seemed to shift. In one photograph, it looked like a stain beside the man's lips. In another, it appeared directly across his mouth. Nora blamed the old varnish. Over time, varnish became yellow or brown. Dirt settled into cracks. Candle smoke and fireplace soot could build up in uneven layers, changing expressions and hiding details. She placed the painting on the main easel and prepared a small test area. Using a cotton swab and a weak cleaning solution, she gently touched the dark mark near the mouth. Soot came away immediately. Beneath it was a soft red color. Nora leaned closer. She rolled the cotton swab across the surface again. More black dirt lifted. The red line became wider. It was not part of the stiff mouth she had first seen. There was another mouth underneath. Nora stopped moving. For several seconds, she stared at the newly revealed color. Pentimento, she told herself. It was not rare for restorers to discover an earlier version beneath a finished painting. Artists changed their minds. They moved hands, altered clothing, covered objects, and painted new faces over old ones. Sometimes an entire person had been hidden beneath another. This was probably what had happened here. The painter had started with one expression, disliked it, and covered it with another. Years of damage had mixed the layers, making the earlier mouth visible beneath the dirt. Nora took more photographs. Then she continued cleaning. The new lips were fuller than the original ones. They belonged to a different face, or at least to a different idea of the same man. The upper lip curved slightly. The lower lip was dark red and looked almost wet beneath the varnish. By 11, Nora had uncovered most of it. The mouth was open. It was not smiling. A smile would have been simple. An artist might paint a smile and later decide it looked foolish or disrespectful. This mouth was stretched open as if the gentleman had been caught while shouting or screaming. Nora stepped away from the easel. The studio lights reflected in the wet surface of the cleaning area. For a moment, the open mouth appeared to move. She changed the angle of the lamp. The illusion stopped. Nora lifted her phone and took another photograph. The picture made the detail clearer. Inside the mouth were teeth. They were tiny and crowded together, arranged in several narrow rows. The front teeth looked almost human, although there were too many of them. The teeth farther back became sharper. The canines were especially long. Nora lowered the phone. No painter could have produced that level of detail with ordinary brushes, especially not beneath another completed mouth. The teeth were thinner than individual brush hairs. Each had a small shadow around it. She found her magnifying lens and examined them again. The paint did not look like paint. The teeth appeared to sit inside the mouth. They seemed to have depth. Nora felt a mild pressure behind her eyes, the beginning of a headache. She had been working too long. She documented the discovery for the condition report, covered the cleaning materials, and left the studio shortly after midnight. Before turning off the lights, she looked at the portrait one last time. The gentleman's eyes still faced the left side of the canvas. The mouth remained open. Nora locked the studio and went home. She returned at 10 the next morning with coffee, a headache, and the clear belief that the painting would look less disturbing in daylight. It did not look like the painting she had left. Nora placed her coffee on the work table and opened the photographs on her phone. The final image had been taken at 11:52 the previous night. In the photograph, the open mouth was about the width of her finger. The corners were dark and slightly stained. On the easel, the mouth was wider, not much wider, perhaps only half an inch. But the difference was obvious. The lips were now pulled farther apart. More teeth could be seen. The dark space behind them appeared deeper. Nora compared the painting and photograph several times. She measured the mouth with a small ruler. Then she measured it again. Humidity could affect a canvas. Heat could loosen materials. Studio lights could change how colors appeared. None of those things could make a painted mouth grow. Nora stood beside her untouched coffee and performed the kind of mental calculation every experienced restorer eventually learned to make. The Whitcombs were paying a rush fee. The auction house expected the work to be completed. Her rent was due. She decided she had measured it incorrectly the previous night. She began cleaning the lower part of the portrait. Layers of dark grime came away from the gentleman's coat. Fine details appeared in the black fabric. Buttons, seams, the edge of a pocket. Then the hands emerged. They rested neatly on his knee, one placed over the other. Nora had assumed they were gloved because they had been almost completely hidden in the shadows. As she removed the dirt, pale skin appeared. The fingers were long. The nails were yellow. Nora counted the fingers without thinking. 4 visible fingers beside each thumb. She paused. The number itself was normal, but their position was not. In the folded pose, at least one finger should have been hidden beneath the other hand. Instead, every long finger was visible, spread closely around the thumbs as if the hands had been arranged by someone who understood the idea of human anatomy, but had never seen it clearly. She leaned closer. The nails came to sharp points. They were not painted on top of the trousers. They had cut into them. Thin lines crossed the dark cloth beneath each fingertip. The marks followed the exact position of the nails, as if the painted gentleman had once pressed his hands into his own knees hard enough to scratch through the fabric. Nora touched one line with a gloved finger. The mark was physically carved into the paint. She pulled her hand away. The gentleman's mouth appeared slightly wider. Nora did not measure it again. Instead, she turned the painting around to examine the back. The stretcher bars were old but strong. The canvas had been repaired at least twice. A patch near the lower corner had been added decades earlier. On the right wooden beam, Nora found several names and dates written in ink. Aderly, 1901, Voss, 1927, Achterberg, 1958. 6 more names followed. The earlier handwriting was careful and widely spaced. The later names had been squeezed closer together as the available space disappeared. Mason, 1976, Reeves, 1988, Albrecht, 1997, S. Owen, 2004. Lerner, 2012. M. Hale, 2019. Nora knew 3 of the names. They had all been painting restorers. Lerner had died from a fall inside his own studio. Hale had disappeared several years earlier, leaving his car parked outside an art storage facility. No one had ever found him. Nora stared at the empty space beneath the final name. Her turn would have made 10. She picked up a pencil. Her hand shook. The pencil point touched the wood, but she did not write. After several seconds, she placed it down. She would not continue the restoration. She would strip only the loose varnish, prepare a report, and return the painting unfinished. The auction house could keep the deposit. The Whitcombs could hire someone else. She would accept the kill fee and lose the extra money. That was what she told herself. By 2 in the morning, she was still working. She could not remember deciding to stay. She could not remember turning off her phone or locking the studio door. She only knew that she was seated before the portrait, moving a cotton swab along the edge of the open mouth. Her shadow stretched across the wall behind her. The studio had become very quiet. Even the pipes had stopped clicking. Nora's hand continued cleaning. Color appeared where there had previously been only gray and black. The gentleman's cheeks gained a faint, damp pink tone. His lips became darker. His skin no longer looked flat and lifeless. Then Nora reached the eyes. The cloudy gray surface came away from the left eye first. Beneath it was brown. Not painted brown. Wet brown. The color had depth and light. A dark pupil appeared in the center. Nora stopped moving. The eye looked directly at her. The other eye still faced the side of the canvas. She stood and moved to the left. The brown eye followed her. She moved right. It followed again. Nora's stomach tightened. She backed away from the easel. Both eyes were now brown. Both looked at her. She had felt the weight of that gaze before she had fully uncovered it. For the past hour, she had sensed someone watching her from across the room. Now she knew where the feeling came from. The gentleman was no longer staring beyond the frame. He was watching Nora. She looked away from the face and noticed that the background had also changed. The flat black space behind the man was becoming a room. Faint walls appeared in the darkness. A narrow floor stretched away behind the chair. There might have been a door near the left edge and a tall window on the right. Several figures stood inside that painted room. Nora could not see their faces. They had their backs turned toward the gentleman. Their bodies were pale and unfinished, little more than human-shaped marks beneath layers of darkness. There were 9 of them. One stood near the back, separated from the others. Its face was pressed against something that looked like glass. Nora leaned closer despite every warning inside her. The face belonged to a man. He was pale and thin. His eyes were wide. His cheek had been flattened against the invisible surface between them. His mouth was open. It was the same mouth Nora had uncovered on the gentleman. The same packed rows of tiny teeth. The same long canines. But this man's mouth had opened wider than the gentleman's. It had stretched beyond the limits of his jaw, making room for something inside him. The man behind the glass lifted one hand. His fingertips touched the unseen barrier. Nora stumbled backward. She needed to destroy the painting, not examine it, not return it, destroy it. The studio had a fire cabinet near the far wall where damaged chemicals and flammable materials could be safely contained. Nora crossed the room, grabbed the top of the frame, and tried to lift the painting from the easel. The frame did not move. It was not heavy. In fact, it felt strangely light beneath her hands, as if the canvas and wood weighed almost nothing. But it would not come free. The painting seemed fixed to the easel. Nora pulled harder. Her shoes slid across the floor. Muscles tightened in her arms and shoulders. The bones in her wrists pushed visibly against the skin. The frame remained in place. On the canvas, the gentleman's mouth opened wider. Nora stopped pulling. A space had formed inside that mouth. A space large enough for sound. She realized a scream was about to leave her throat. The gentleman realized it too. His eyes brightened. Nora released the frame and reached for the restoration scalpel on the work table. She would cut the canvas from the stretcher. A damaged piece of loose cloth would be far less dangerous than a complete portrait. She could claim the canvas had torn during treatment. Insurance would deal with the loss. Whatever happened after that would happen without her. For one confused second, Nora imagined the money she might still make. She imagined writing a report, calling the auction house and explaining that the painting had been ruined because of hidden structural damage. She imagined surviving the night. She raised the scalpel. A hand came out of the portrait. It belonged to the gentleman, but it did not move like a painted hand becoming real. It seemed to come from somewhere behind the canvas, from the dark place where hands went when they disappeared into pictures. 4 long fingers unfolded beside a narrow thumb. The yellow nails ended in sharp points. Nora did not understand what she was seeing until the hand closed around her wrist. It was cold. The grip tightened. Nora screamed and pulled back. The hand did not drag her into the painting. Not at first. Instead, the canvas bulged outward. The entire surface rippled like water after a stone had been dropped into it. The gentleman's face stretched with the movement. The dark room behind him bent around the shape of the arm. Pressure wrapped around Nora's wrist. Her skin began moving toward the painted hand. It did not tear away from her bones in a single piece. It peeled slowly, tightening around the other wrist as if her body were trying to join it. Nora slashed with the scalpel. The blade struck the creature's wrist. It did not cut canvas. It did not cut skin. It opened something that felt like thick, wet cloth wrapped around wire. Dark liquid appeared along the cut. The hand jerked. For a moment, the grip weakened. Nora pulled. The gilt frame bent inward. The gold-covered wood softened as if it had become warm wax. Its edges curved toward the center of the painting. The whole portrait seemed hungry. The gentleman's mouth opened farther. The low sound began. It was not a growl. It was a deep vibration, almost like the purr of a very large cat. Nora felt it through the floor and inside her teeth. A small, clinical part of her mind recognized the sound as pleasure. The rest of her nerves were occupied with pain. The hand pulled again. Nora's wrist entered the canvas. Then her forearm. The surface closed around her skin, warm and wet. Her elbow struck the frame. Something cracked inside her arm. Nora screamed again. The sound joined the vibration coming from the portrait. Her sleeve tore with the noise of wet cloth. Beneath it, her skin split along the pressure line. Blood ran toward the painting rather than down her arm. The canvas drank it. Nora drove the scalpel deeper into the creature's wrist. The blade caught on something hard. The frame folded inward again. Nora's shoulder hit the canvas. The painted surface opened around it. Her joints made small, wet sounds as her body was drawn forward. Her arm bent in a direction it had never been meant to bend. The studio lamp continued burning above her. Its yellow light showed every detail. Nora saw the gentleman's face from only inches away. His skin was no longer made of paint. Tiny pores covered his cheeks. Sweat shone above his lips. His crowded teeth moved inside his mouth. Behind him, the dark room had become clear. The 9 pale figures stood with their backs turned. The man at the glass was gone. There were now only 8. An empty space waited beside them. Nora understood. The restorers had not signed the stretcher to record their work. The painting had recorded them. Edel, Voss, Achterberg, all the others. Each had cleaned the portrait. Each had uncovered the mouth. Each had stood where Nora stood. And each had been taken into the room behind the gentleman. Nora tried to release the scalpel, but her fingers would not open. The gentleman's hand pulled her deeper. Her face touched the canvas. For a moment, the surface stretched against her nose and mouth like a sheet of warm rubber. Then it opened. The smell inside was old varnish, wet soil, copper, and breath trapped in a sealed room for more than a century. Nora saw the figures turn slightly. Not enough to show their faces. Enough to show that they knew she was arriving. The gentleman's mouth closed around the scream still leaving her throat. The lamp burned for several more hours. At some point before morning, the studio became quiet again. The Whitcomb heir arrived on Friday to collect the portrait. He came with 2 employees from the auction house and a building supervisor. Nora had missed several calls. Her studio door was locked and no one answered when they knocked. The building supervisor opened it with a spare key. The lights were still on. The room was empty. Nora's coat hung beside the door. Her phone rested on the work table. Her bag was beneath her chair. A scalpel lay on the floor near the easel. The auction house employee picked it up carefully and placed it inside a plastic evidence bag. Later, a forensic technician examined the blade. There was no blood, no skin, no useful material of any kind. The edge was cleaner than most surgical tools. The portrait stood on the easel. It looked completely restored. The Victorian gentleman sat in his carved chair, dressed in perfect black. His face was pale but calm. His mouth was closed in a firm, respectable line. His hands rested properly on his knee. The strange scratches in his trousers had disappeared. His eyes looked toward a distant point outside the frame, exactly as painted eyes were supposed to do. The background was no longer empty. A window had appeared behind the gentleman. The auction house records contained photographs of the portrait before restoration. There had been no window in those images. Now it was clearly part of the scene. Within the painted glass stood a small, pale figure. A woman. Her face was turned sideways, one cheek pressed against the window. Her hair was dark. Her clothing looked modern and completely wrong for the Victorian room. The woman's features were not fully finished. Only the beginning of her expression could be seen. A small smile was forming across her lips. One of the auction employees said the face looked familiar. No one else agreed. The Whitcomb heir ordered the portrait wrapped again. As the employees lifted it from the easel, one of them examined the back of the canvas. A new name had appeared beneath the others. The writing was cramped and uneven, as if it had been added by a shaking hand. Kessler, 2026, Story 3. I run a small podcast with 2 of my friends called Creepy Tales. We investigate local legends, haunted places, strange disappearances, and anything else that sounds interesting enough to turn into an episode. We never treated it like serious journalism. It was mostly something we did because we enjoyed it and because people seemed to like watching us scare ourselves. We had around 4,000 subscribers on YouTube and a few hundred listeners on Spotify. That was not bad for 3 people working with cheap equipment and limited time, but it was not enough to change our lives. We all still had regular jobs, bills, and other responsibilities. Episode 31 was supposed to be about the ghost bride of the falls. We never posted that episode. This is why. The legend comes from a waterfall outside the village where I grew up. According to the story, sometime during the 1960s, a newly married couple went there to take wedding photographs. The bride stood near the top of the falls while her husband and the photographer prepared another picture. Then she fell. Some people said she slipped. Others said her husband pushed her. The husband disappeared shortly afterward. Nobody could find him, and the people who had been near the falls that day gave confused and conflicting statements. Some claimed they had seen the husband running into the forest. Others said they never saw him leave at all. The police searched for him but found nothing. The bride's death was never fully explained, and her husband was never seen again. Over the years, people began reporting sightings of a woman in a white wedding dress. Sometimes she appeared at the top of the waterfall, standing dangerously close to the edge. Sometimes people saw her below, half hidden by the mist. A few witnesses claimed she stood among the trees watching people walk along the path. She was always wearing the dress. There was another local story connected to the forest, though most people did not link the two legends together. Children had been disappearing in the area since the 1800s. It did not happen every year. Sometimes 10 or 15 years passed without anyone going missing. But it happened often enough that local families knew about it. Parents warned their children not to wander away from the path or go near the water alone. People outside the village rarely heard about those disappearances. We plan to cover them in a later episode. I say we plan to because there will never be another episode of Creepy Tales. Not one involving me, anyway. My name is David. I am 22 years old, and I grew up in the village near the falls. My mother told me about the bride when I was a child. I should have left the story where it belonged, as something people whispered about but never went looking for. There were 3 of us working on the podcast. I handled most of the research and appeared on camera with Sandy. I am better at writing than speaking, but I had improved after 30 episodes. My cousin Kai often said, I thought too much about everything. He was probably right. Sandy was my age and had recently finished university. She was the main reason most people watched us. She was quick, confident, and naturally funny. She could turn a boring piece of information into something interesting just by the way she told it. The camera loved her. It did not love me in the same way. Sandy had wanted to work in television when she was younger. Creepy Tales was the closest she had come so far. And I knew she hoped the podcast would eventually lead to something bigger. Brian was 26. He was a friend of my cousin from back home, and he did all our filming. His full-time job was recording weddings, which became disturbing to think about later. He was very good with the camera. He also knew he was good and made sure everyone else knew it too. Brian and I had the kind of friendship where we constantly insulted each other. Most of the time, it was harmless. Most of the time. The drive to the village took about 2 hours. Brian spent the first 40 minutes complaining that we were missing a football match. Wales was playing Bosnia and Herzegovina in a World Cup qualifier, and he had been looking forward to it for weeks. I suggested listening to the match on the radio. He said it was not the same as watching it. Sandy said nothing because she did not care about football, or peldrode, as we call it in Welsh. Brian and I both thought there was something wrong with her because of that. At some point, Brian made a joke about my nose. I do not remember the exact words, but it was something about me being able to smell the waterfall from the motorway. Sandy said my nose was not that large. Brian replied, "That's what she said?" I told him that at least I could grow a proper beard. Brian had been trying to grow one for 2 years. All he had managed was a patch of hair on his chin and a few weak hairs along his jaw. Sandy laughed and said, "Not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin." Brian did not find that funny. I noticed he seemed bothered specifically because Sandy had laughed at him. I remembered that moment later. We arrived early on Thursday afternoon. The waterfall was about a 20-minute walk from the village. The path went through a forest that looked like something from an old painting. Everything was green, dramatic, and beautiful. But there was also a sadness to it. That is how many places in Wales feel, even when the weather is good. I had not returned to that forest in 4 years. Walking along the path felt strange, like putting on an old coat from your teenage years and discovering that it almost still fit. The waterfall was larger than I remembered. The water fell over a dark wall of rock into a wide pool below. Mist hung in the air, and the sound was so loud that we had to raise our voices whenever we stood close. We spent several hours filming. Brian recorded wide shots of the water, the forest, and the path. Sandy introduced the legend while standing far enough from the edge that the waterfall appeared behind her. I told the history of the bride in the serious voice I used for our episodes. It was normal work. Nothing frightening happened. However, we found several objects on the path that I have not stopped thinking about. The first was a doll. It had a painted china face and a cloth body. It looked like something from the Victorian period, though I could not tell if it was truly old or made to appear that way. One of its eyes was missing. The remaining eye reflected the light in a way that made it seem alive. I picked it up for the camera, but I quickly placed it back on the ground. We found more dolls farther along the path. Some were missing arms or legs. One had been broken in half. Another had no face because someone had smashed the head against a rock. They were spread out at irregular distances, almost like markers guiding us deeper into the forest. Sandy said hikers probably left them there. She pointed out that people often created strange art projects in forests or tried to scare visitors. Brian did not comment. He simply filmed every doll we found. Later, we discovered several clay pots. They were small and rough, arranged in a circle beside the path. There were no flowers or plants inside them. Some were half buried in the soil. The arrangement might have been natural, but it did not look natural. I had known the bride legend my entire life, but nobody had ever mentioned dolls or clay pots. Whatever they meant, they were not part of the story I knew. We continued filming until sunset, then returned to a local inn. Nothing unusual happened that night. I slept well. The next day, we returned to the falls in the evening because we wanted darker, more atmospheric footage. The forest looked different near sunset. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, and the path became difficult to follow. The sound of the waterfall reached us long before we saw it. Near the top of the falls, we found footprints. They were narrow heel prints, the kind made by formal women's shoes. The ground was wet and soft enough for the marks to be clear. They led along the path toward the edge. Then they stopped. There were no prints leading away. Sandy crouched beside them and stared for a long time. Brian filmed them from several angles. I remained standing and felt something I had not experienced since childhood. It was the cold feeling of a story becoming real. Until that moment, the bride had existed only in memories, local gossip, and the words I had prepared for the camera. Now there were heel prints leading toward the edge of the waterfall. Then we heard crying. The sound was faint and came from below. All three of us stopped moving. Sandy looked at me, and I moved closer to the edge. We leaned forward and stared down through the mist. For around 5 seconds, I saw something at the bottom of the waterfall. A figure in white. It stood in the water, or perhaps slightly above it. I could not tell because the mist kept moving across its lower body. The figure was looking up at us. Then it disappeared. Brian had been adjusting the camera and missed it. Sandy grabbed my arm so hard that her fingers hurt. Neither of us spoke. That night, Brian reviewed the footage in his room at the inn. Sandy and I sat nearby while he moved through the files, checking sound and lighting. Suddenly, Brian became silent. Brian was never silent. He replayed an establishing shot from earlier that evening. The camera had been facing the forest while we prepared another scene. Beyond the nearest row of trees, something white stood in the shadows. It looked human. It was watching us. The clip lasted only 4 seconds. The picture was grainy, and mist from the falls softened the details. But the figure was there. Brian played it 3 times without saying anything. Then he found something in the audio. He had been cleaning the sound and reducing the noise of the waterfall. Beneath the water, the wind, and our voices was another voice. It had been present through almost the entire recording. None of us had heard it while we were there. Brian gave us headphones and played the audio separately for each of us. The voice spoke directly to each person listening. The strange part was that we did not hear the same words. I know that sounds impossible. I cannot explain it. We did not tell one another what we had heard that night. Sandy went to bed without speaking much. Brian remained in front of his laptop for a long time. I returned to my room, lay in the darkness, and stared at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what the voice had said to me. I'm not going to hide it now, but at that time, I could not even repeat the words inside my own head without feeling ashamed. On the 3rd morning, Brian wanted to leave. He said we did not have enough good footage for a full episode. According to him, the strange figure and the footprints were interesting, but we had no proof they were connected to the legend. He used the calm, practical tone he always used after making a decision. Sandy was unusually quiet. She kept looking toward the trees whenever she thought nobody was watching her. I told them I wanted to visit the falls one more time. It was my hometown. It was the story my mother had told me when I was young. I was not ready to leave without understanding what we had seen. Brian argued with me for several minutes. Then he agreed. One more time, he said. We returned in the early afternoon. Brian filmed while Sandy attempted another piece to camera. Her voice sounded empty, and she knew it. I stood near the water, looking down at the rocks. Then all 3 of us heard the voice. It was the same voice from the recording. This time, it was not coming through headphones. It spoke directly behind us, as if someone stood with their mouth beside our ears. The voice said something different to each of us. It spoke to Brian about Sandy. It told him that he knew I had feelings for her. It said that he had encouraged me, laughed with me, and pretended to support me while secretly beginning a relationship with her. The voice called him my friend, but it said the word as if it meant the opposite. Sandy heard something else. The voice told her that she did not believe in ghosts, legends, or anything we discussed on the podcast. It said every frightened expression and serious speech had been a performance. It mocked her need for attention. It said she did not care about the stories, only the audience. What the voice said to me was more personal. It knew about a girl named Fionn. I had liked Fionn when I was in year 9. I never told her. I spent so much time worrying about rejection that she eventually started dating my friend Gareth. I had not thought about her in years. Nobody knew how strongly I had felt about her. The voice knew. It reminded me of year 10 physical education classes, and every activity I had failed while the other students succeeded without effort. It mentioned a short story I wrote in year 11. The story won a small school prize, and for a while, I secretly believed it meant I might become a real writer. Nothing came from it. The voice reminded me of my first YouTube channel. I had created it 3 years earlier and truly believed it would become successful. It reached 47 subscribers before I abandoned it. Then the voice connected all those failures to the present. Brian, Sandy, my habit of waiting while other people acted. The same pattern repeating again. That was the worst part. The voice did not reveal anything new. It simply took everything I already feared and forced me to look directly at it. Brian was so distracted that he stopped paying attention to the ground beneath him. His foot slipped. One moment he was standing near us. The next, he was gone. Sandy screamed. We looked over the edge and saw him lying on a narrow rock ledge around 15 feet below. He had not fallen into the water. He had hit the ledge and stopped. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Brian later said he did not remember falling. He remembered standing near the edge, then feeling pain so strong that he could not breathe. Sandy and I carefully climbed down to him. While Brian lay there, trying not to move, I looked past him. Behind the waterfall, partly hidden by the falling water, was an opening, a cavern. It was dark inside, and I could not see how far it continued. The moment I saw it, I felt a strong pull. The cave seemed important. It felt like the answer to a question I had been asking my whole life without knowing it. Sandy said we were leaving. She said we needed to get Brian to a hospital and that nothing else mattered. She was right. We called for help, and Brian was eventually taken away. His leg was worse than doctors first believed, and he remained in the hospital longer than expected. Sandy stayed with him at first. Then she stopped visiting. I understood what that meant, even though nobody explained it. While waiting in the hospital, I reviewed the footage on my laptop. Most of it was normal. There was enough material for an average YouTube episode, but nothing extraordinary. Then I found another short clip. It lasted around 5 seconds. I posted it to our channel without a title, description, or explanation. Within 2 days, the video received more views than anything we had ever uploaded. The comments immediately divided into 2 groups. Some people said it was clearly fake. Others said it was clearly real. I watched the argument without replying. Then I called Sandy. Brian was still in the hospital. I told her I wanted to return to the cavern. I know how foolish that sounds. I should have stayed away. But the pull had become stronger. I could not sleep without seeing that dark opening behind the water. It felt like something inside the cave was calling me. Sandy said no. Several seconds later, she changed her answer. She said she would come. I did not ask why. We returned to the falls alone. The cavern could be reached by stepping across several narrow rocks beside the water. The stones were slippery, but we moved carefully. Inside, it was cold in a way that did not feel connected to the temperature. The sound of the waterfall was overwhelming at first. After a while, it faded into the background like a smell your mind stops noticing. We entered deeper into the darkness. Neither of us said we should dig. We did not bring shovels or tools. Still, we suddenly found ourselves on our knees, moving the earth with our bare hands. It felt natural at the time. That is what frightens me most. We scratched through the cold soil until my fingers hurt. Then Sandy stopped moving. Something pale was sticking out of the ground. It was a hand. Most of the flesh was gone, but the bones were strangely well preserved. A damaged shirt cuff remained around the wrist. The fabric was old, but still recognizable. The bones were small enough to tell us something about the person. It was the husband. He had never escaped. He had never abandoned the village. His body had been hidden behind the waterfall for decades. Nobody had ever searched there. Sandy and I looked at each other. Then we heard movement behind us. We turned toward the waterfall. The bride stood there. She was beautiful. I want to make that clear because I think it matters. Imagine the most attractive actress, model, or person you have ever seen. She looked like that, only more perfect. Her white dress moved around her as she stepped through the falling water. Then her face changed. The beauty disappeared like an expression falling away when someone stops pretending. What remained beneath it was ancient. Her skin looked as though it had been underwater for 100 years. Her mouth was too wide, and her eyes were dark and empty. That was when I understood that the ghost bride had never been human. Whatever stood before us knew how to look human. It knew how to appear beautiful. It had practiced for a very long time. Then we heard children laughing. Through the waterfall, I saw 2 children walking along the path above us. They were around 10 or 11 years old. They were eating snacks and talking, completely relaxed. They were not watching where they were going. Children that age rarely do. A terrible feeling entered my stomach. I wanted to leave the cave and warn them, but I could not move. Sandy was frozen beside me. The bride continued watching us. She never looked toward the children. The first child reached the top of the waterfall. Then they walked over the edge. There was no scream before the fall, no slip or attempt to stop. One moment, the child was on the path. The next, they were gone. The second child followed immediately. The sound they made when they hit the rocks below is something I will never describe. The entity finally turned its head toward their bodies. Then it looked back at us. It was smiling. The smile was almost human, but not enough. "So you found my husband," she said. The moment she spoke, I understood. She had killed him. The bride's legend had never been true in the way people believed. This creature had entered the story, worn it like a dress, and used it. Before the bride, it had probably been something else. Before that, another form. It had lived near the waterfall since the 1800s, perhaps much longer. It created legends around itself and used those stories to bring people toward the water. The missing children were not a separate mystery. They had never been separate. The creature moved faster than I could see. One moment it was several feet away. The next, its hand was around my throat. Its other hand grabbed Sandy. It lifted both of us from the ground without effort. I still remember the pressure of those fingers. The creature was stronger than anything living should have been. It held us as if our weight meant nothing. My vision began turning dark. Then everything disappeared. I woke on the path above the waterfall. Sandy was lying beside me. She opened her eyes at almost the same moment. The children were gone. There were no bodies below the falls, no blood, no signs that anyone had fallen. The cavern was still visible behind the waterfall, but when we looked inside, it appeared completely dark and empty. I refused to enter again. Both Sandy and I had marks around our throats. We called the police. The officers searched the area carefully. They were polite and professional. They listened to our story without laughing. But they found nothing. They did not believe us, though they were kind enough not to say it directly. Sandy and I drove home in silence. I believe she has her own version of what happened. Perhaps the voice showed her things it never showed me. I am writing this from my flat on the 16th floor. I have been trying to finish this account for 2 weeks. I keep stopping because every time I remember the cave, I feel those cold fingers around my neck. 8 days ago, Sandy sent me a message saying she was finished with the podcast. I replied with one word, "Okay." She never answered. She ended whatever secret relationship she had with Brian and is moving out of town to live with her parents. Brian is out of the hospital now. We have spoken twice. Neither of us has discussed what the voice said. I do not know whether we ever will. During our last conversation, Brian mentioned that one of the nurses smiled at him for too long during the night. He tried to make it sound like a joke. I do not think it was. I keep thinking about the children. I see them walking toward the edge whenever I close my eyes. I do not know what to do with that memory, so I have been carrying it with me every day. 3 nights ago, something began knocking outside my window. The first night, it was soft, 3 light taps. The second night, it was louder. Last night, the knocking continued for almost an hour. At around 4 in the morning, I heard someone crying outside. I live on the 16th floor. There is no balcony. There is nowhere for anyone to stand. I have been writing this with my back facing the window. I cannot make myself turn around. I tell myself I do not know what I will see. That is a lie. I think I know exactly what is outside. I just do not want to write it down. The knocking has started again. It is happening as I type this. It is louder than it was last night. A woman has just whispered my name from the other side of the glass, and now there are children laughing with her. Story 4. This happened a long time ago when I was still young enough to believe that every mystery had a simple answer. For years, I told people what happened, hoping that at least one person would believe me. Most laughed in my face. Some called me a liar. Others said prison had damaged my mind and that I had created the whole story to escape the truth of what I had done. But I know what I saw. The supernatural is real. Most people are simply lucky enough to live their entire lives without coming face to face with it. I remember the beginning as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Sarah threw a newspaper onto my desk during our lunch break at school. The paper slid across my books and stopped in front of me. Her finger pressed firmly against an article near the bottom of the front page. "A head huntress," she said. I looked up at her and waited for the smile that usually followed one of her strange theories. It never came. Sarah was completely serious. She had always been interested in the occult. Her room was filled with books about ghosts, witches, curses, demons, and creatures that supposedly lived between the human world and whatever existed beyond it. I never cared much for those things, but I liked listening to her talk about them. Her eyes became brighter whenever she explained an old legend, and she spoke with such confidence that even the most ridiculous stories almost sounded possible. Almost. "Have you seen the paper this morning, Ricardo?" she asked. Before I could answer, she opened it wider and pointed at the article. "Another young woman was murdered this week. Her body was found without a head. Look at this. It cannot be a coincidence. Put the pieces together." I glanced at the headline. The police had found another headless body near the edge of town. It was the third murder in a short period. Each victim had been young, and the bodies had been badly beaten. "Sarah," I said, "I have been dating you for a while, and I really do not mind your obsession with supernatural things. I think it is cute most of the time. But this is ridiculous. You are crossing the line." I pushed my chair back and started to stand. "No, Ricardo. Listen to me." She grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "This time, it is real. Do you not see how this cannot be a coincidence? Every week, another young woman disappears, and then her body is found without a head. The bodies are damaged like the killer hated them. That only proves there is a psychopath killing women. It proves more than that. What does any of this have to do with Mrs. Olena?" Sarah looked around to make sure no one was listening. Mrs. Olena lived only a few houses away from us. She was old, wealthy, and strange. But she had never done anything openly dangerous. She rarely left her house and always employed young maids who seemed to disappear after only a few days. At the time, I had never considered that unusual. Rich people did strange things. "The other day," Sarah whispered, "I read about headhunters in one of my books." "You mean people who collect heads?" "Not exactly. In the stories, they were women who spent their lives consumed by jealousy. They hated other women, especially women who were younger or more beautiful. If they died without being buried properly, they returned as something else. They hunted women and stole their heads." I stared at her. "Good God, Sarah. You think our elderly neighbor is some kind of jealous zombie that cuts off women's heads?" "Headhuntress," she corrected me. "They only hunt women. And think about it. Mrs. Olena hires young maids and replaces them almost every week. What if she waits before killing them so no one connects the disappearances to her?" I rubbed my forehead. "Or perhaps they quit because she is difficult to work for." "There is more." Sarah's face became even more serious. "The other day, Mrs. Olena told me I had a wonderful head. I tried not to laugh." Sarah leaned closer. "She did not say I had a pretty face. She said the shape of my head was excellent. That was too much." I laughed loudly enough for several students to turn toward us. Sarah's expression hardened. "Do not laugh at me." "I am sorry," I said, although I was still smiling. "She is an old woman. Older people say strange things. They compliment your head, your hips, your skin, or whatever else they notice. She was probably trying to say you were beautiful." I moved closer and reached for her hand. "You know you are beautiful." She pulled away. "If you really believed that, you would support me." Then she walked away. I spent the rest of the school day thinking about the conversation. I still did not believe Mrs. Olena was a supernatural creature, but the murders were real. The missing maids were real, too. After the final class, I found Sarah near the school entrance. "I will help you," I said. Her anger disappeared immediately. "You really will?" "I was serious, Ricardo." "I know. I will go with you and prove that all of this is inside your head." She crossed her arms. "How exactly are you planning to prove that?" "I do not know. It is your theory. What do you want to do?" Sarah hesitated. "I thought I could distract Mrs. Olena while someone searched her house." "You want me to break into her house?" "If I am right, she might cut my head off while you are searching." I laughed, but Sarah did not. "No," she continued. "You are coming inside with me. A third person will search the house." That was how Daniel became involved. Daniel was one of my closest friends. He was curious about everything and had a habit of entering places he had no business entering. If there was a locked door, Daniel wanted to know what was behind it. He came to meet us shortly after I called. We explained Sarah's theory. Daniel listened with his mouth slightly open. When we finished, he shook his head. "You two have lost your minds." Sarah frowned. "Mrs. Elena is strange," Daniel continued. "She rarely leaves the house, and those maids never stay long. She also speaks like she came from another century. But saying she is a supernatural monster makes no sense." "If you do not want to help, just say so," Sarah replied. Daniel looked thoughtful. "There is one thing." "What?" "That basement." Sarah and I glanced at each other. Daniel lowered his voice. "People have heard noises around the back of her house late at night. There is a heavy door with a large padlock. Maybe she is not a monster, but perhaps she is hiding something." "That is what we need you to search," Sarah said. Daniel stared at her. "You want me to break into the basement?" "Sarah and I will keep Mrs. Elena busy. You only have to break the padlock and look around." "That sounds dangerous." "You said you were curious." Daniel sighed. "I am extremely curious." "Then you are helping?" He looked from Sarah to me. "I am in." We put the plan into action later that afternoon. Sarah and I walked to Mrs. Elena's house and knocked on the front door. Daniel stayed out of sight and made his way around the back. Mrs. Elena opened the door after several minutes. She looked exactly as she always did. Her white hair was tied into a neat bun. She wore a long, dark dress, and a silver chain hung around her thin neck. "Well," she said, "what a pleasant surprise." She invited us inside. The house smelled of old wood, dust, and something sweet that reminded me of dead flowers. Heavy curtains covered most of the windows, leaving the rooms dark even though the sun had not fully set. Mrs. Elena spoke endlessly. She asked about our parents, our schoolwork, and our future plans. As usual, she moved slowly through the room with short, dragging steps. A young maid entered carrying tea and cookies. She wore a black dress with a white apron and a small white cap. She looked like a maid from an old film. Sarah leaned close to me. "They always dressed like that," she whispered. "Do you not think it might be a pattern connected to the murders?" "Sarah, Mrs. Elena has the physical strength of a dead tree. If someone is murdering women, it is not her. She could be pretending to be weak. Headhuntresses are deceptive." Mrs. Elena turned toward us. "What are you two whispering about? You make such a sweet couple. I hope you are not secretly kissing in my sitting room." Sarah's eyes became wide. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. "Mrs. Elena," I said, "we are 16. She smiled. "That never stopped anyone?" The maid placed the tea on the table. She did not speak or look at us. Her movements were smooth and careful, almost too careful. She kept her head slightly lowered, and long dark hair covered part of her face. Sarah watched her the entire time. The afternoon passed quietly. No one screamed. No hidden creatures appeared. Mrs. Elena remained nothing more than a strange, talkative old woman. As darkness began to fall, Sarah and I said goodbye. We walked several streets away to the place where Daniel had agreed to meet us. He was not there. We waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 30. The sky darkened, and cold rain began to fall. "Do you think something happened to him?" Sarah asked. "No." My answer came too quickly. "Maybe he went home. He would not leave without telling us. Perhaps the basement door was harder to open than he expected." We waited longer. The rain became heavier. "Sarah, let us go to my house. We can call him from there." I tried to sound calm, but I was worried. Daniel enjoyed taking risks, but he was not careless enough to disappear without saying anything. Sarah and I reached my home and sat in the living room. We turned on a movie, but neither of us watched it. Every time the wind moved a tree branch against the window, Sarah jumped. At around 8 in the evening, the doorbell rang. I stood immediately. Daniel was outside. He looked terrible. His clothes were soaked. His face was pale, and his entire body shook violently. Rainwater ran from his hair and down his cheeks. "Daniel," I asked, "what happened? Did you get lost?" Lightning flashed across the sky. Daniel looked past me into the house. "Sarah was right," he said. His voice trembled. "The old woman is a head huntress." Sarah and I stared at him. Daniel stepped inside and began speaking quickly. "I searched the basement. At first, I found nothing except old furniture and boxes. Then I saw a large cabinet against the wall. It was locked, and I could not open it. There was a dark stain on the floor in front of it." He wiped rain from his face. "Then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs." Sarah grabbed my arm. I hid behind a pile of furniture. I could still see the cabinet. "Mrs. Elena came down with the maid. The old woman told the maid to clean the stain." Daniel's teeth were chattering. "She opened the cabinet." "What was inside?" I asked. Daniel looked sick. "Heads." The room became silent. Dozens of them, all women, all young and beautiful. They were not rotten. Some had their eyes open. Others looked like they were sleeping. They were arranged by a hair color, as if she were collecting them. Sarah covered her mouth. Daniel continued. "Mrs. Olena took out a blade. It looked like a small scythe. She stood behind the maid while the girl cleaned the floor. He stopped and struggled to breathe. The maid never saw her. Mrs. Olena pulled the blade across her neck." Sarah made a quiet sound. "Blood hit the floor. I ran. I could not stay there. We have to go to the police." "Did you come directly here?" Sarah asked. "Yes." "Are you sure no one followed you?" Daniel froze, his eyes widened. "No." The lights went out. Darkness filled the house. Sarah called my name. I found her hand and held it tightly. For 1 second, I tried to believe the storm had damaged the power lines. Then glass shattered somewhere down the hallway. A woman screamed from one of the bedrooms. Sarah screamed too. Daniel ran toward the front door. "Daniel, wait!" He ignored me and disappeared into the rain. I placed one hand over Sarah's mouth. "Stay quiet." She stared at me with terrified eyes. "I will not let anything happen to you," I whispered. I did not feel as confident as I tried to sound. My brother kept an aluminum baseball bat in the corner of the living room. I grabbed it and moved toward the hallway. Sarah stayed directly behind me. We entered the bedroom where the glass had broken. The window was shattered. A stone lay on the floor. No one was inside. Sarah looked around. If someone only threw a rock. What made that scream? I tightened my grip on the bat. It was a distraction. For what? To slow us down. We have to find Daniel. We ran outside into the rain. Daniel had gone in the direction of his house, so we followed the same road. "Should we not go to the police first?" Sarah asked. Her voice was weak. "Even if we convince them to search Mrs. Olena's house, it will take too long. Daniel is alone, and whoever threw that rock may be following him." The truth was that I felt responsible. I had asked Daniel to help us. If anything happened to him, it would be my fault. The street was empty because of the storm. Rain struck the road in thick sheets. Then a figure appeared in the distance. Sarah grabbed my arm. I raised the bat. "Who is there?" The figure moved closer. It was Daniel. Sarah released a breath of relief. He was wearing a long raincoat now. The hood was down, allowing us to see his face. "Do not worry," he said. "I am fine." Sarah relaxed. I did not. Something was wrong. I felt a cold warning pass through my body. Every part of me wanted to turn around and run. But Sarah was beside me. I could not leave her. "I am glad you are safe," I said slowly. "Where did you get the raincoat?" Daniel looked down at it. "I found it lying around." "Lying where?" "I do not know. It is raining. We should find somewhere dry." Sarah began to turn away. I stopped her. "Daniel," I said, "where are your manners? Let Sarah wear the coat. She is freezing." Daniel stared at me. For several seconds, no one moved. "I have a cold," he said. "I am confused. Let us just hurry." "Wait." I raised the bat slightly. "How many heads did you say were inside the cabinet?" His eyes moved from me to Sarah. "I do not know. Around 20? Sarah became pale. She understood. "No," I said. "You never gave us a number." The thing wearing Daniel's head stopped pretending. Its face twisted into an expression of pure rage. The skin around the forehead stretched too tightly. The mouth opened farther than it should have. Its voice became high and unnatural. "You should have died quietly, children." The creature charged at me. A blood-covered knife appeared from inside the raincoat. I swung the bat. The metal struck its ribs. The creature fell sideways, and the raincoat slipped from its shoulders. Sarah screamed. Daniel's head sat on top of a thin female body. The head looked too large for the narrow shoulders beneath it. The body was strong and fast, dressed in tight black clothing that looked designed for climbing, hiding, and killing. For one strange second, I remember thinking that the creature was in excellent physical condition for someone I had believed was an old woman. It attacked again. I swung the bat at its head. The blow connected. Daniel's head flew from the body as if it had only been loosely attached. It struck the road and rolled through the rain. The headless body did not fall. It released a high scream from the open neck and ran into the darkness. "How can it see?" Sarah whispered. Her back was pressed against a wall. She stared at Daniel's head. "Daniel," she said. "Ricardo. That is Daniel." I looked down. His eyes were closed. His face had become peaceful. "Sarah, he is dead." The creature had found him alone in the rain. I hoped it had killed him quickly. I knew that hope was probably useless. "Sarah, go to the police." She looked at me. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going back to Mrs. Elena's house." "Why?" "To end this." "You cannot go alone." "I was faster than that thing. I can do this. Take Daniel's head with you. Show the police. They will have to believe you." Sarah looked down at the head. Her face twisted with horror. "What if they think I killed him?" "Tell them everything. Make them search the house." She stepped closer and kissed me. "I will go as quickly as I can," she whispered. "Do not get yourself killed." Then we separated. I ran toward Mrs. Elena's home. By the time I reached it, my clothes were soaked and my arms ached from gripping the bat. The front door was locked. I went around the house. The back door stood open. It was an invitation, or a trap. I knew that. Still, I entered. The house was completely dark. I moved slowly through the rooms, listening for footsteps or breathing. The furniture appeared as large black shapes in the shadows. Nothing moved. I thought the creature might have gone to the basement to choose another head. Then I heard a noise from Mrs. Olena's bedroom. The door was partly open. Through the gap, I saw the old woman packing clothes into a suitcase. She moved with surprising speed. Several bags lay open on the bed. She was preparing to escape. I waited until she turned her back. Then I entered and swung the bat at the back of her head with all my strength. The impact made a terrible sound. Mrs. Elena cried out and collapsed. Blood flowed from her skull. She did not rise. Her head did not come loose. She was dead. I stared at her body. It made no sense. Daniel had seen her kill the maid. She had to be the creature. Unless Daniel had misunderstood what he had witnessed. The bedroom door creaked behind me. I turned. The maid stood there. For one instant, I understood everything. The headhuntress was not Mrs. Elena. It was the maid. There had never been several maids. The creature wore the stolen heads of different women. Mrs. Elena had helped to change them, hide them, and find new victims. The maid's face twisted with hatred. "You miserable child," she screamed. "You killed my servant." Mrs. Elena had not been the master. She had been serving the creature. The headhuntress lunged at me. Her fingernails were long and sharp. She aimed for my eyes. I swung the bat, but the large bed blocked my movement. The creature was faster inside the house than she had been outside. Her nails cut across my face. Blood entered my eyes. I stumbled backward. She attacked again. I realized that using Daniel's head may have weakened her. His head had not belonged to a young woman. Perhaps it had not fitted her body properly. Now she wore the head of one of the maids, and she was stronger. I thought I were going to die. Then the creature screamed. Something struck the back of her head. I wiped the blood from my eyes. Sarah stood behind her, holding an iron bar. The headhuntress staggered. A thin line became visible around her neck. Blood slowly leaked through it. "Sarah," I shouted. "Her head is already loose." I swung the bat into the creature's chest. She stumbled backward. The next blow struck the side of her head. The head tore free and rolled across the bed. The headless body released another terrible scream. It leaped between us and ran through the doorway. "Sarah, what are you doing here? Where are the police?" "I went to the station," she said. No one was there. "What about Daniel's head?" Her eyes dropped. "I could not take it. I could not even look at it. Sarah, we are alone in this house with that thing." "We are not alone. We have each other." She stepped closer. "If you could fight it by yourself, imagine what we can do together." I wanted to argue, but she had saved my life. We ran to the basement. The large cabinet stood open. Heads covered the floor. Daniel's description had not prepared me for the sight. Some appeared to be sleeping. Others stared at us with cloudy eyes. A few mouths remained open, as if the women were still trying to scream. Some of the eyes moved. They followed us as we crossed the room. Sarah pointed toward a large suitcase. Several heads had spilled from it. "Mrs. Elena was packing upstairs," she said. "The creature must have been putting the heads into the suitcase. They plan to leave town. What do we do? We hide. It will need another head." We moved behind old furniture and waited. Minutes passed. The basement remained silent. My face burned where the creature had scratched me. Blood continued dripping from my chin. Sarah breathed quickly beside me. Then she whispered, "What if she keeps another head somewhere else?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "For emergencies. What if she has one hidden in another part of the house?" I had not considered that. Then she would put it on and run. "No," Sarah said. "Headhuntresses are driven by revenge. She will not run. She will try to kill us first." I thought for a moment. "Stay here." Sarah grabbed my sleeve. "No, please, I am terrified. Hide behind the cabinet. I will search upstairs. Keep watching the basement door." She finally agreed. I returned to the upper floor. The house seemed even darker than before. I searched the kitchen, sitting room, hallway, and several bedrooms. Nothing. I began to wonder whether the creature had already escaped. Then I heard a noise from the basement. A quick movement, a door closing. My blood became cold. I ran toward the stairs. Sarah appeared at the bottom and rushed upward. She was pale and breathing hard. "That was close," she said. "She was hiding in the basement the whole time." "Where?" "Inside one of the cabinets. She came out without a head. It was horrible." "Did she attack you?" "I slipped past her. She is still down there. This is our chance." She reached for my arm. "Go now, Ricardo." I looked at her. Something felt wrong. It was the same warning I had felt when Daniel appeared in the rain. A feeling I could not explain. But Sarah looked frightened. Her clothes were wet. Her hair clung to her face. She sounded like herself. "Stay here," I said. I raised the bat and descended the stairs. The basement was silent. Several cabinet doors stood closed. I approached the first one. Empty. The second was also empty. I somehow knew the rest would be the same. Then I looked behind the large cabinet where Sarah had been hiding. My body stopped moving. A headless corpse lay on the floor. The clothes belonged to Sarah. Blood covered her neck and chest. One of her hands was still wrapped around the iron bar. For several seconds, I could not breathe. I could still hear footsteps upstairs. Then laughter passed through the house. Sarah's laughter. The creature was wearing her head. It had killed her in the basement, attached her head to its body, and walked up the stairs pretending to be her. It had spoken with her voice. It had looked at me with her eyes. And I had believed it. I ran upstairs, but the front door was already open. The laughter faded into the storm. I found the real Sarah's head later. It was missing from the house. The police arrived not long after sunrise. They found me inside the basement, surrounded by the heads of murdered women. Mrs. Olena's body was upstairs, killed by a blow from my bat. Daniel's head was discovered in the street. Sarah was gone. The police did not believe my story. Why would they? My fingerprints were on the bat. My blood was mixed with the blood inside the house. Witnesses had seen Sarah and me visiting Mrs. Olena earlier that day. They decided I had killed Mrs. Olena and Daniel. They believed Sarah had either escaped or that I had hidden her body. I spent years in prison. Whenever I told anyone about the creature, they laughed. Some prisoners called me the headhunter. Others asked me where I had hidden Sarah's head. No one believed that she was still out there. But I knew. A few months after my release, I saw Sarah again. At least, I saw her head. She was standing across the road from my apartment wearing the body of another woman. Her face had not aged. She smiled at me exactly the way Sarah used to smile when she had discovered something exciting. Then she tilted her head. A thin line was visible around her neck. She raised one hand and waved. Before I could cross the road, she disappeared into a crowd. The murders started again the following week. Young women were found without their heads. The police never caught the killer. They never will. She can wear any face she chooses. She can speak with the victim's voice, copy their expressions, and use their memories well enough to fool the people who love them. But she always makes mistakes. Small ones. A wrong answer, a forgotten detail, a smile that comes a second too late. So listen carefully. When someone you love returns after disappearing, ask a question only the real person could answer. Watch the way they move. Look closely at the skin around the neck, and if something feels wrong, do not ignore it. The person standing in front of you may have the right face, but the body underneath may belong to the headhuntress.